Hello everybody, I'm Liliana Devniska. I'm Education Coordinator for BDCI, and I'm very pleased to be welcoming you all to the third Communities of Nature webinar. The aim of this series is to provide training related to social justice and inclusion by creating a space for you to interact with the leaders in the field. This will allow them to share their expertise with you to support you to grow the social role at your Botanic Gardens and your museums. This afternoon we've got Jennifer Schwartz-Ballard, who is Vice President of Education and Community Programs at Chicago Botanic Garden, where she oversees the garden's adult and children's education offerings, horticultural therapy, and the urban agriculture Windy CityHarvest program. And we're very honoured that she agreed to give this webinar today. And now I'll hand you over to Jennifer, who'll be talking about embedding community work at the Chicago Botanic Garden.
Thank you, Liliana, and hello to everyone. I am really pleased to be here to share some of the work of the Chicago Botanic Garden around social inclusion. And I have a PowerPoint here that I am going to share with you as I talk through. All right, I hope you can all see that. So as Liliana said, I am the Vice President of Education at the Chicago Botanic Garden. I've been here for about 12 years now, and the garden has quite a long history in terms of social responsibility and citizen work, so I'm really pleased to be able to share that with you today. I'm going to begin by defining what I mean by social inclusion so we all have a shared understanding as we have this conversation. I will then share a little bit about the history of the Chicago Botanic Garden because it's important in providing the context for the role of social inclusion in our current education and community programs. I'll then give 3 case studies illustrating how these values are implemented in programming and how they address a variety of barriers to full participation in society. I'll then talk about how the garden institutionally supports these values. And finally, I'll provide some lessons learned and suggestions for implementing similar activities at your home institutions. As Liliana mentioned, throughout the presentation, we'll have some polls set up to find out a little bit more about how all your organizations are currently engaged with social inclusion. So look for those as we go through our conversation. So what do I mean when we talk about social inclusion? Social inclusion is a practice and an approach that works to ensure that every individual has the resources, supports, and access to opportunities to be successful in their life pursuits. It recognizes that the playing field isn't level and that some of us start out with more advantage than others. It also recognizes that every person, no matter what their race, background, ability, or living situation, has gifts and is worthy of respect. You know, clearly, this is a really important issue, but why is this important for gardens? There are other organizations that address social equity issues. There are lots of those organizations out there. So at first glance, it may seem peripheral to our work, but it's really central to our collective mission as Botanic Gardens. Core to all our missions is preserving healthy ecosystems, right? But if we're going to do that, we really need to attend to all the other systems to which they're connected. Our environment includes the entire context in which we operate. Social, economic, political, it includes our health and education systems and our food systems. And so as we recognize that, we realize that we can't do conservation work in isolation. We can't do it in a vacuum. We have to take these other systems into account as we carry out our work. As part of that work, we have to contribute as much as possible to the health of these other systems and to the people who depend on them. So if all these other systems aren't functioning, we won't be able to achieve our conservation goals. And in fact, many gardens are already doing this work, whether or not they make social inclusion an explicit goal. Gardens are doing work on climate change adaptation, on food access, community greening and revitalization, and economic development. And all of those are grounded in the belief that community health is connected to ecological health. And I want to be really clear about this. It's not only acceptable to do this work, but it's really fundamental to our future relevance. And if you consider the broader definition of environment that I'm proposing, it really becomes explicitly connected to ecological and conservation goals. I'd like to know, and this is our first poll, does your garden currently offer programming or activities that address social inclusion goals, either implicitly or explicitly? Let me take a step back and share a little bit about the Chicago Botanic Garden and its history, so you have some context for the case studies and know how we got to where we are today. We are located in Glencoe, Illinois, which is approximately 20 miles north of the city of Chicago. So though we're called the Chicago Botanic Garden, we are not in Chicago. We're located at the far northeast corner of Cook County, which is the municipality which includes the city of Chicago and its suburbs. We are a public-private partnership between the Chicago Horticultural Society and the Forest Preserves of Cook County. So Cook County taxes cover just over 1/4 of our budget. We have a total of 385 acres, approximately 1/3 natural areas, 1/3 landscape gardens, and 1/3 water and aquatic ecosystems. We have over 1 million visitors annually, and education and community programs has approximately 135,000 participants that participate in about 1,500 programs, events, and experiences that we run each year. As Liliana mentioned, the division is made up of 3 program areas: learning, horticultural therapy, and urban agriculture. Chicago Botanic Garden is a young garden. We opened in 1972, but our roots go much farther back to the late 1800s with the formation of the Chicago Horticultural Society in 1890, which laid the groundwork for our current focus on social justice and inclusion. So that's where I'm going to start. You can see this emphasis on education and engagement in the 1908 bylaws of the Horticultural Society, including increasing the love of horticulture among the people. This emphasis was seen in 3 strands of outreach in the early days of the society: access to nature, the therapeutic benefits of nature, and civic and community gardening. So the role of nature in child development received considerable attention in the progressive era, which in the US was 1890 to 1920. In Chicago, there were a lot of initiatives that converged to bring specifically children into closer contact with nature. And the Chicago Horticultural Society made children's gardens a priority. This focus was carried through the society's flower shows, as you can see in the poster in the PowerPoint. And later, the society also brought nature to children in schools, illustrated by the 1956 photo of some of the society's earliest school programs. Likewise, therapeutic horticulture also has historical roots. In the 1870s, many cities in the US formed flower missions. In Chicago, the Chicago Horticultural Society included bazaars for hospitals and health charities. And later, in the society's flower shows in the 1950s through 70s, individuals with disabilities were encouraged and warmly welcomed and accommodated with easy access. In 1954, the Society collaborated with the Chicago Lighthouse for the Blind to design one of the very first gardens used for day-to-day therapy. Finally, civic and community gardens. Really, we started this work in 1943 with World War II. We joined the Victory Garden movement, which was an Office of Civilian Defense initiative designed both to supplement civilian food rations with fresh fruits and vegetables and to bring communities together. So you can see from these 3 examples that social responsibility really is a core part of our identity. These historical interests in community gardening, therapeutic horticulture, and equitable access to nature really evolved into the program areas that I oversee today, our current education and community programs division. And so this is something I'm also quite interested to know is social inclusion and social responsibility part of your garden's history and mission? And if you click on that poll, okay, so the responses that I'm seeing really tend towards this is not part of a garden's history and mission, though I do see one response that also has a similar focus. And so hopefully you will get some ideas for how to better incorporate social inclusion work into your existing programming in your garden. So in 1965, the Horticultural Society partnered with the Cook County Forest Preserves and identified a site in the northern suburbs on a degraded wetland. So we opened to the public in 1972. Things changed substantially opened as we were operating from a set location far outside the city of Chicago, rather than operating much more fluidly and bringing programs to people in their Chicago communities. So we are really now challenged to offer programming to people all over the country. When we're located in that corner, the Cook County, and you'll see the outline of Cook County on that map and where the garden is located in relation to the rest of the county. The county covers over 1,600 square miles and has a population of 5.3 million. And because we're part of the forest preserves and we receive taxpayer dollars, we have a mandate to serve the entire county. So we had some really serious questions to address. And how are we going to serve people in all of these communities? How do we provide people access to our grounds? And how do we have a presence in communities across the region? And so for those of you who are doing social inclusion work, how do you engage, or for those of you who have other programs that engage diverse audiences, I'm interested to know how you engage those diverse audiences and where you engage them. Do you offer programs on site? Do people come to you? Do you offer programs off-site? Or do you do both? Great, it looks like a lot of you are doing both. And that makes a lot of sense to me, because there are, especially for us, there are a lot of barriers to access to our garden. You can reach us by public transportation, but it's very difficult. And I think the specific issues that we're dealing with, that I think we're all dealing with around social inclusion, they've evolved. How we talk about them has changed over time. But the underlying challenges and solutions, I think, are really not so different. And addressing those challenges is, perhaps more urgent, given the population explosion and our increased awareness of human impacts on the environment. But I think we all know the gap between humans and nature has never been wider, as as our society continues to urbanize, and the importance of the human connection to nature has never been more obvious. And so the role of Botanic Gardens in addressing these challenges has never been more essential. So I'm going to share 3 case studies of Chicago Botanic Garden programs that help bridge that gap. But first, I wanted to ask if there are any questions at this point, either about the role of Botanic Gardens in supporting social inclusion, or about the history of the Chicago Horticultural Society and the garden. Okay, so the one question I have is, how is it possible that we have so many visitors if the garden is not in a central place? Is one. And then I see another question: for a garden that does not have social inclusion as part of its mission, how do you suggest communicating the importance to the rest of the staff? I will quickly answer the first question, and then I will take a little bit longer to answer the second question. We are accessible by car. People make the effort to, we have a very large membership base, so we have about 50,000 member households, and a lot of those member households visit multiple times. So when we're talking about 1 million people a year, it's not necessarily 1 million individuals a year, it's 1 million visits a year. So that's one way. But we also are one of the primary tourism destinations in the Chicago region, and I think people just make an effort to come out here. And it's difficult, but you can get here by public transportation. So we do have visitors who come that way. The second question, for a garden that doesn't have social inclusion as part of its mission, how do you suggest communicating the importance? That's a much more complicated question. And I think one of the ways that you can do it is, I think, and I'll talk a little bit about this later, engaging the leadership and understanding what the priorities of the leadership are is really important. And if gardens want to stay relevant, we need to engage diverse audiences. We can't be perceived as exclusionary or as exclusive organizations, and that's a practical consideration as well as sort of a more ethical consideration. If we want to stay relevant, if we want our visitorship to grow, if we want our program revenues to grow, it's really important important to engage those audiences. And engaging those audiences means making them comfortable with your garden, with your programs, and making them feel welcome. So I think that's one argument you can use. And then I think the other argument you can use, and there are many depending on the perspectives that your staff and leadership are coming with, is positioning them not as, and we have a donor who has a very specific perspective. This foundation funds all of the programs, all of the case studies I'm going to talk about, they support. And they don't want to support charity. They want to support programs that provide people with opportunities that allow them to empower themselves. And so that's another way of positioning it is, these are not charity programs. It's about providing people with the opportunities to better contribute to society, which really improves life for all of us. So I think those are two ways you can think about it. But when I get towards the tail end of my presentation, there'll be a couple of suggestions that I have for that. I'm going to, I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to move back on to the case studies. So case studies. When we talk about social inclusion, we're talking about providing opportunities to those who have barriers to their full and successful participation in society, including lack of access to education and jobs and healthcare and healthy foods. So I'm going to share 3 case studies, one for each of the 3 historical areas of our community programs. So one focused on educational equity, one focused on food access and farming, and one on the therapeutic benefits of nature. So I'm going to begin with the Science Career Continuum, which is a series of science enrichment and college prep programs supporting Chicago public school students in achieving science careers. The end goal of this program is to increase diversity in the sciences. It's made up of 4 program components. Our Science First program, which is our middle school program, which is US grades 8 through 10. It's a 4-week summer program. College First, which is our high school program, which is US grades 11 and 12. Our undergraduate internships in research and education. So once students have graduated from College First and they are in undergraduate, they can apply for those. And then we have a collaborative master's and PhD program in plant biology and conservation in collaboration with Northwestern University. So Science First is our middle school program where students enter the continuum. They can participate for up to 3 years, beginning in the summer between their 7th and 8th grade year. There are 2 4-week sessions each summer, serving about 20 to 25 students. We target 7th graders in Chicago public schools who are the first in their family to go to college, who are low income based on their eligibility for free or reduced lunch at school, who are African American or Hispanic, and who have an interest in science, nature, and the outdoors. Chicago public schools, you may or may not know, have some challenges. Many of them are under-resourced and provide limited access to high-quality science education or to enrichment opportunities. Families in these neighborhoods don't often have resources to seek those opportunities, so we are providing those high-quality science experiences for those students. We are also addressing some social and cultural barriers. Often, students' peer groups don't share their interest in science, so they might not actively seek out those opportunities, and they don't often have adult role models who are scientists, so don't consider science as a career. And in answer to one of those earlier questions, Science First, the Science Career Continuum programs take place here at the Chicago Botanic Garden. We provide busing for those students. We have 2 bus routes that run throughout the north and then the south and west sides of the city. And students are bused here and they spend all day, every day in the summer for the Science First students. That's a 4-week program. So we're also addressing some so in Science First, we provide experiences that are primarily designed to foster an interest in science and welcome these students into a supportive community. So the Science First program is not designed to be highly academic. It is science enrichment, they get science education, but the really important part is that they get excited about science, and they feel comfortable in the community here at the garden. We are not looking for top students for these programs, which is actually something that distinguishes our program in the US. We're looking for, the top students, they're going to be fine without our support. We're looking for students who have the capacity and the interest, but not necessarily the social and academic support networks. Once students have participated in Science First, they can participate for up to 3 years. So this is a pathways program that's designed for students to come back for multiple years. They can apply for College First. So for 8 weeks in the summer, students spend half of their time in a college-level environmental science class, and they get college credits through the city colleges of Chicago. And the other half of their time in a one-on-one mentorship with a garden staff person, primarily in the research and horticulture department. So they work in our research laboratories. During the school year, students have monthly meetings where they learn about green careers and how to negotiate the college application process. They are paid for their time because we recognize that many of those students would otherwise need to get jobs to help support their families. College First is much more academically rigorous. It's very much focused on academic preparation and college preparation. So we refine that supportive community created in Science First to a more focused community of practice around science and academics. We have a stepwise mentoring program where students see individuals at every stage of their career, from undergraduate to research professional and everything in between. So it really creates a familiarity and an ability to see themselves at each stage. As I said, we provide help in negotiating that complex college application process during school year meetings. And then finally, we connect them with other support networks which provide resources throughout their college career, recognizing that we can't do everything. And one thing that I'll be highlighting throughout my case studies is that collaboration is essential to make these programs successful and powerful. No one institution can provide all of the resources that students might need by itself. So that kind of collaboration with Chicago Scholars, which is a local nonprofit that supports students in college, that supports minority students as they move through college, with the City Colleges of Chicago to provide those college credits that get our students a little bit of a foot in the door. They've already got college credits when they start officially in college. So just emphasizing those collaborations are absolutely essential. College First graduates can then come back to the garden during their undergraduate years to participate either in research internships in our research department, our science department, or as teaching assistants in the Science First program in our education department. So the other thing I want to emphasize is that this doesn't happen overnight. College First, the first program we launched as part of the Continuum, had its 20th anniversary in 2014. And so we've had a lot of time to build this program. When the program started, we worked with 3 schools, we worked with 9 students every other year. And so it's that slow and steady building of a program and working to engage an audience that is really important. And so here I come to our next poll. Do your gardens offer programming that address barriers to education? Okay, so the responses I see are a few of you do and a few of you aren't sure. And I would suggest for those of you who aren't sure, when we're done with this webinar and you have a little bit of time, think about the audiences that those programs serve and the needs of those audiences. And it may be that you're already doing this work. So my next case study is Windy CityHarvest, which is our sustainable urban agriculture program, which addresses access to food, education, and jobs. Windy CityHarvest is dedicated to empowering youth and adults through sustainable urban agriculture and increasing access to fresh, healthy produce in food insecure communities. And we do this by encouraging people to eat plants, in quotation marks, through education, access, and training. Windy City Harvest also has 4 main components. We have our youth farm, which is our high school program, the core that works with young adults with barriers to employment, the apprenticeship program, which is our career track program, and an entrepreneurship program, which provides opportunities for apprenticeship graduates to plan and launch their own urban farm businesses. We have 13 sites across the Chicago region. 10 of those are in the city of Chicago, and together they encompass approximately 7 acres of farmed land. So in contrast to the Science Career Continuum program, which takes place at the Chicago Botanic Garden, this is really a community-based program. 95% of the work that we do takes place in Chicago communities. So the youth farm really is a leadership development program in the context of urban sustainable agriculture. As I said, high school students, we have 4 sites, 3 in the city of Chicago and 1 in North Chicago, which is just north of the garden. 3 serve youth who live in food insecure communities. Like the college first students, we do pay participants, recognizing that, again, these youth would otherwise have to find summer jobs. In addition to learning agricultural practice, students also engage in leadership development, which is reflected in the program structure. So students move from crew to crew leaders and take responsibility for farmers market sales. Hands-on components are supplemented with the Roots of Success curriculum, which is an environmental literacy and work readiness curriculum that addresses issues of environmental justice. And they also learn healthy eating habits and culinary skills. They prepare shared meals together from the produce that they grow. So I see, how much do they get paid? They get paid minimum wage. It is not, so for the youth farm students, it's part-time during spring and fall when they're in school. They work afternoons and weekends. And then for, it's a 4-day-a-week program during the summer. And then, so the second component we have is the core program, which is a 14-week full-time workforce development program. That program is targeted towards individuals ages 17 to 24 who have barriers to employment. Specifically, we work with nonviolent offenders coming out of the criminal justice system and with veterans. There are 2 cohorts each year with approximately 15 participants. Like youth farm students, they complete the Roots of Success curriculum, but they also receive wraparound support. So they get help coordinating any other social services that they receive. They create an individual employment plan along with receiving instruction on writing resumes and cover letters, as well as job search assistance. The apprenticeship program is a 9-month certificate program in sustainable urban horticulture, the heart of which is an intensive hands-on internship program bookended by coursework. Again, students receive credits from the city colleges of Chicago that can be used towards an associate's degree. This group is really diverse. Approximately 1/3 of those participants are coming out of our core program, and so they receive scholarships. 1/3 are or underemployed, and they receive Workforce Reinvestment Act support, which is a federal employment program. And so they're eligible for reduced tuition. And then 1/3 are simply interested in urban sustainable farming, and they pay full tuition. So graduates of the apprenticeship program can continue with industry-specific coursework, aquaponics production, business and entrepreneurship, season extension, edible landscape, and rooftop gardening. And the graduates of the business course are eligible to apply for one of 8 allotments to launch their own urban farm business. To give you a sense of the scale and development of the program over time, I have just a few stats to share. Since the inception in 2003, we've distributed over 10,000 produce boxes through the Women, Infants, and Children's Nutrition Program. That's a federal food nutrition program. We've grown over 500,000 pounds of produce and served over 1,600 individuals. Currently, we produce approximately 75,000 pounds of produce and serve over 220 participants annually. And one thing, again, I want to highlight here is partnerships. Partnerships are critical to this program. Each of the different 13 farm sites has a different coalition of community partners with different interests. So all our programs are urban sustainable agriculture. land ownership and programming look different at each site depending on the needs and interests of the community. So we make it a point not to own any land. So we're really dependent on collaborations to keep these farms running. The same is true for our produce distribution. Some of it we distribute to communities through U-Pick days, but we also sell to local restaurants. The WIC program pays us for distributing the produce boxes, and we have a partnership with Midwest Foods, who is a local food distributor. And so I can't emphasize enough how important collaborations are to making programs like this work, both from a practical standpoint and just getting things done, but also from sort of a community standpoint, an impact standpoint, and an inclusion standpoint. If you really want to work towards social inclusion, one of the best ways to do that is through partnerships. And it also means that it also means, I've lost my, here we go. It also means that where you don't have expertise, you can supplement that expertise with that from other organizations. And a really good example of this is our newest endeavor, which is the Farm on Ogden, which is in North Lawndale in Chicago. We're collaborating with the Lawndale Christian Health Center on a facility that includes a commercial scale aquaponic system, commercial kitchen and microprocessing center, healthy corner store, cold storage, produce packing station, multi-purpose community safe, along with office space for our Windy City Harvest staff. Lawndale Christian Health Center purchased the building and is actually the building owner. And they have committed to renovating that space to essentially moving condition. The garden has committed to running the operations out of that space and to outfitting with all the equipment that we will need for those operations. The site will really streamline our processes and allow us to increase production, again, contributing to revenues that help support the program. But this is more than expanded operations. It really illustrates a new focus on the health benefits of eating fresh produce. This is our second collaboration with a community healthcare facility and an expanding area of operations. This map shows the impact area of the Lawndale Christian Health Center. Their Ogden Avenue clinic is their central location, but they have 7 total locations that serve communities on the south and west sides of Chicago. These communities are some of the most challenged in the city. They're areas of high unemployment with little access to healthy, fresh food or fresh produce. As a result, a lot of their residents suffer from health-related diseases such as obesity and diabetes and heart disease that can be treated with dietary solutions. And this is where the garden comes in and where this collaboration becomes really powerful. We're working with over 25 healthcare providers at Lawndale Christian Health Center on a produce box prescription program. So 240 of their patients will receive prescriptions. Each patient will receive a produce box monthly for 5 months, as well as nutrition education and cooking demonstrations. And so Windy City Harvest really reflects the connections I mentioned earlier between human health, that of the environment, and of society, providing fresh produce, jobs training, access to green space, and economic revitalization. So food is a really good way of engaging community. So that's our next poll. How many of you use food gardening to support social inclusion? All right, so the responses that I have are saying yes, and I'm not surprised about that. It's one of the very best ways to connect with people from all walks of life. Everyone has to eat, and everyone appreciates fresh produce and healthy foods. And then, and to the person who earlier asked about how do you engage, how do you convince people that this is something that your garden should be doing? I think food gardening is a really good intersection and a very obvious intersection between the role of a botanic garden and the community, where some of the other ways of engaging communities might be a little bit more abstract. So this is one really good way, is to sort of think about food as that entree into social inclusion programming. Lastly, I'm going to share our veterans program. So veterans have somewhat different barriers to participation in society. They may have mental or physical limitations caused by their service, and they have some challenges, may have challenges transitioning from a military to a civilian culture. And use of nature-based therapies has a number of benefits. For some vets, traditional medicine and drugs just don't effectively address their problems. And so we find that many are seeking out alternative and complementary medicine that enhance existing therapies. And at least in the United States, the Veterans Administration medical system can be very, very difficult to navigate. And it really is overwhelmed right now with patients. So they're really looking for other therapies to help supplement what they may already be getting. They also face physical, mental, and social barriers to civilian employment. There are substantial cultural differences between the military and civilian workplace. And a lot of the skills that they do develop in the military are not necessarily recognized by civilian companies because a lot of the professional certifications are different. So through our Veterans Retreat program, we work with veterans who are actively in therapy for various conditions, including PTSD, depression, and anxiety. It's designed as a complementary therapy to existing talk therapies and medication. So participants come to the garden with their therapist 12 times a year, once monthly, for a variety of plant-based activities and reflection. And again, we don't do it alone. Collaborations are essential. We collaborate with Thresholds, which is a community mental health facility that provides a variety of support services for veterans, everything from mental health services to housing to employment. Each visit includes a variety of activities. So to begin with the day, participants volunteer somewhere in the garden. So they might install spring planting at the Buehler Enabling Garden, harvest produce at our fruit and vegetable island, or rake the Zen gardens at Sanchoen, our Japanese garden. They then participate in an intentional grounding exercise and another plant-based activity. So whether that's an herb garden or a dry terrarium or a memorial garden stones or cooking activity. And then finally, each visit closes with time to process their experiences with their therapist. So when these participants come to us, they come with their therapists. And their experiences are facilitated both by our horticultural therapy department and by their primary caregiver, their primary therapist. And I do just have to say a couple words about this slide in the PowerPoint. This is an individual who has been participating in our program. We're now in our third year of this program in 2016. When he first came to us, he was struggling. And so this is the herb garden activity where they had them put an inspirational phrase on their herb garden. And in 2014, his phrase was "keep going." And in 2015, it was "got there." And that always brings tears to my eyes that we can have that kind of impact. So what we found is that vets very much appreciate the opportunity to step away from traditional therapies and see this as a respite. They report feeling reduced symptoms of anxiety and stress when they're in the garden. They enjoy sharing the projects and new knowledge with their family. These experiences broaden their perspective and help them stay grounded, and they really see the garden as a safe space where they can let down their guard, and that's really powerful. A lot of them are hyper vigilant. When you're in a military situation, you constantly have to be aware of what's going on around you, and so the fact that they can be here and not be constantly worried about what's going on around them is really powerful. Our Veterans Internship Program is the next step in the process. This is a transitional employment program for vets who have completed their therapy and who are work ready. These are military service members who've returned from overseas and are reintegrating into civilian life. So this combines job search training, pre-vocational internships, and therapeutic horticulture that helps individuals transition into the workforce. The program focuses on teamwork, commitment to mission, and service, which we know are characteristics overall of successful transitional employment programs. And we do that in the context of interactions with plant and nature. This year we have 4 participants working in education, interpretation, horticulture, and ecology. That's actually a really good question, and I know I'm not going in order of questions and answers, but how do we connect with veterans? That is really hard. And that one of the reasons we're in this pilot program through Thresholds, through that retreats program, we connect through Thresholds. So they are a fairly large organization, and they have a client base of veterans who we collaborate with them to serve. For this internship program, we were casting a much wider net, and I don't know how this plays out globally, but I know in the United States aren't affiliating with, you know, local veterans VA groups, or they are not joiners. So they tend to be dispersed throughout communities and don't necessarily want to identify as veterans. So one of the things that we're doing is we're trying to work with other organizations that serve veterans to get it out to their client base. But that was one of our challenges. This was the first year for this internship program for us. We aimed to have 7 participants. We have 4 because of that very issue. And thinking about, and so for next year, we will be expanding our networks and really actively looking, again, collaboration to partner with organizations that already have a client base of veterans. And so what we're trying to do here is, so far so good. As I said, this is our first summer. Our interpretive programs department is actually interested in hiring their intern who was an engineer in the military, and he's been working as an engineer on our model railroad. And so here we've been addressing a couple of different barriers between military and civilian job cultures, as well as those caused by any physical or outstanding physical or mental conditions they might have. So just in summary, so the 3 programs I've talked about, Science Career Continuum, Windy City Harvest, and Veterans programs are really quite different in structure and audience and context and content, but they have some shared underlying philosophies and approaches. They share the belief that every individual has the right to fully participate in society and to be successful, that supporting these successes creates a more sustainable society for all of us and really benefits all of us, and that exposure to an engagement with nature is a powerful way to make those things happen. And we are going to be taking a question break in a minute, but before that I want to share just a few logistical details that you might be wondering about that sort of cut across all of these programs. And the first is sustainability. How do we keep these programs going over time? And obviously funding is always an issue. So just to give you a little bit of the dirty details in terms of how we do that, the direct program expenses are primarily covered by a combination of grants and earned revenues. In particular, Windy City Harvest is run as a social enterprise, so a lot of those produce that we grow is sold, and those revenues are fed back into the program. So they're covered by a combination of grants and earned revenues. Our horticultural therapy department has contracts to provide services. So for example, our collaboration with Thresholds is a collaboration, and so we share the expenses of that program 50-50. The cost of the permanent staff who run these programs is included in our general operating budget, though of course we cover their time with grants when we can, but their positions are not grant dependent, so they're not soft money. And we've made an institutional commitment to commit the dollars required to run these programs. In terms of the staffing structure for Science Career Continuum, we have 1 permanent staff person for that program who oversees the suite of programs. And then we hire in seasonal instructors and interns to run those programs when they are actually in session. And that's true for the Science First program and the College First program. Our undergraduate internship. She also runs the education undergraduate internships. But again, we come back to collaboration, and this is collaboration across departments at the Chicago Botanic Garden, that those research internships are part of our science department. And so they have separate funding in their operating budget to support those interns. For Windy City Harvest, we have a number of permanent staff who run those programs with seasonal help. But the apprentices, the participants in the core program and the youth program and the apprenticeship program, they're the ones, as they get their farming and agriculture experience, they're the ones who were doing a lot of that work on the farms. And those are students and seasonal help. For horticultural therapy, the programs are overseen by full-time permanent staff, and then we occasionally have a grant-funded seasonal. The second question is how we might have how we communicate our presence to really become visible as a leader in social inclusion programming. And there are three things that I think really contribute to our visibility, but not just our visibility, to our program success over time. And the first is simply a commitment to the programming itself, to delivering the highest quality programming and to maintaining it over the long term. The second is evaluation, and I don't know if any of you were at the last BGCI webinar where they focused specifically on evaluation, but it's a really, really important component of any program. To have credibility, you need to be able to prove beyond the anecdotal level that your programs do what you say they do. And that's also a key to fundraising. And you don't have to have a fancy evaluation. You just need something that tells you that you're getting the results that you're aiming for. And the third is storytelling. And I think this is often sort of an underutilized and it's an underutilized way of engaging people. There is nothing more compelling than a story of empowerment and success. So capturing and sharing those stories, or even better, having participants tell their own stories, is a really good way to engage people with the work that you do. So finally, I'm going to stop talking. I've been talking for a long time. So let's take a break and I'll answer a few questions before we move on to the next part, where I'll talk a little bit about how social inclusion is embedded in different parts of the garden's operation. So let's see. That's a really good question. So how can we encourage people from suburbs or countryside if we are really in the city center? That is a really good question. And there are many, many museums, and in particular, I'm thinking of the Garfield Park Conservatory in the city of Chicago, which have that issue. Garfield Park Conservatory is not in the best neighborhood. And I think visibility is really important. And I think it actually works both ways. And I don't know, Hannah, where you are and what city suburb you're looking for. But I know that Garfield Park Conservatory has a very active outreach campaign to the general Chicago region, and highlight the unique things that people can come and see and do. You could bill it as tourism. So that's another, if you're in the city center, you can think about it and market it as a staycation. So you don't have to go, take a 3 or 4 days and go off somewhere. You can take a vacation at home, come to us, come to the city, have a nice fancy dinner out, come to your institution. So that's what I would suggest. It's a very different problem from the one that we have. But I think making people feel welcome is a strategy that can work in either context. So the next question I have is, we're in a rural area and forming a care farm. What advice do I have? I think the advice that I have would be collaborate. I think that's critical. If you're going to, even if you have your own land, I think bringing in representatives from your local communities, I think bringing in from local nonprofits, even just community members to share the work that you're doing and get their feedback and their thoughts, depending on the audience that you're targeting. And that to me is just so important when you start any kind of program like that. And I'm going to reflect back on Windy City Harvest for a minute. As I mentioned, each one of those 13 sites is different. And they're different because the partnerships that we have and the goals of each community are different. So for example, we partner with Austin PCC, which is a community health center, on one of our urban farms. And the programming there, one of our interns runs the garden, but they also have allotment gardens for community members to come and do their own gardening. So we provide training and workshops for those community members. For a youth farm, so our North Lawndale Youth Farm is right next to the Lawndale Christian Health Center. So what they want is youth development. And so we partner our farm in Englewood we partner actually with one of the neighbors to run that farm. She keeps an eye on it for us. It's in a very, very at-risk neighborhood. And so having that personal community connection, she's retired, she loves gardening, and she keeps an eye on that farm when we're not there. So that's the advice I would give you is create a coalition. Don't try to do it by yourself. Create a coalition and develop your program around what is really important to the community. So the next question I have here is about the Veterans Internship Program. Is there one staff person, and is this person a registered hort therapist who is participants the whole time, or do they work with various staff members around the garden? If they switch supervisors, how do you train other staff to work with participants? Really good question. So they do work with different staff members. So there is one person who is coordinating that program. That person is not a registered horticultural therapist, but is under the supervision of an HTR. And they are not with those individuals all the time. So there are two components. There's the workforce readiness component, which is carried out by that part-time person. And then there is the internship, where each veteran is paired with a garden staff person in each of those different departments. And they are directly supervised by those staff people. We did collaborate, and I'm going to blank on the name of the organization, but we did collaborate, again, collaboration with an organization that has expertise in veterans workforce training to provide training to those staff members. And in fact, any staff member who is interested. They did a lecture that was attended probably by 80 of our garden staff who were just interested in understanding some of the challenges that veterans face in reentering the workforce and how you can work with them. But those 4 individuals did receive additional training in working with and supervising veterans. So another question. We have very small gardens in the old city center. All kinds of people have vegetable plots at the city borders. Do you have advice on Connect? So not knowing a whole lot about how those vegetable plots are organized and whether they're allotment gardens that are all coordinated by one entity, or they're just sort of random individuals who have gardens, or different community organizations who have gardens. I think how you connect may be a little bit differently. But I would say go to those locations. And like I said, I don't know the context enough, so it's hard for me to say. If you can put a little bit more information in the chat, Oh, so if they're in groups and clubs, I would say connect. If you know who those groups and clubs are, connect with them. Say, we have a garden here, you have these gardens. Can we create a coalition? Can we, for example, coordinate if they are production gardens and they have sort of extra produce? Can we coordinate on food aggregation and distribution? Maybe you can create some education programming or some training that could bring all these groups together. If your garden has expertise in sustainable gardening, for example, maybe you say, hey, we all have these community garden plots. Let's all get together and we can share some of our expertise around this specific kind of gardening, or season extension, as a way of connecting across and finding out what their interests are and how what kinds of connections and collaborations would be beneficial to them. Am I missing? Oh, I think I missed one. Oh, how many veterans are in the program? So in the internship program, we're only serving 4 veterans this year. That's a much more intensive program. In the retreats program, it's about 15. So these are not huge programs, but they're very intensive and supportive programs. So it's a really narrow slice of sort of the larger work of horticultural therapy, which I am not going to talk about today. And my contact information will be at the end of the presentation. So if you want to know more about the other hort therapy programs that we offer, I'm happy to follow up on that. All right. So are there any more questions before I move on? And I know I'm not doing this in exactly the timing, and I think I've probably got a lot more questions now, but I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about, I'm going to zoom out a little bit and discuss how social inclusion is or isn't embedded in different parts of the garden's operations, which is a very different perspective than talking about individual programs and specific engagement goals. So as you heard earlier, social inclusion is part of the garden's history and remains part of our mission. And we've had a lot of success. Institutionally, we have both policies and procedures that work towards inclusion. For example, and this is fairly recent, just in the last 3 or 4 years, we have supplier diversity goals. So we monitor our spending and work to support minority and women-owned businesses. When we do job searches, we seek out those media that reach diverse audiences, and we work to ensure that our employee benefits are flexible and inclusive. So, for example, we provide benefits for same-sex couples, and I don't know globally how common or uncommon that is. In the US, it's not as common as we would like it to be. And we have all staff materials and trainings in both Spanish and English. That said, we still have a long way to go. Like many public gardens, at least in the United States, our management staff is mostly white, as is our board of directors, but we're working to change that. Leadership, especially over the last 10 years, has strongly supported inclusion goals, and they did make a commitment fundraise for the programs I've shared with you today. They formed and instituted the policies and we have asked staff to set goals for increasing diversity, and we hold staff accountable for meeting those goals. So, which leads me to our next poll. We haven't had one in a while. What do you think is the most important aspect of implementing social inclusion programs? So we're also working to be inclusive in our public programs and visitor operations to make sure that everyone feels welcome at the garden. And we have work to do here too. In terms of visitor operations, we have a challenge, as I mentioned earlier, simply because of our location. We're not easy to get to without a car, though you can. And we're in a rich suburb, so a lot of people have the perception that we're exclusive. In our public programs, we're really almost starting from scratch in terms of understanding who our visitors are. We have zip code data, but beyond that, we don't have much demographic information. If you visit on a busy weekend, you can see that our audience is diverse, but we don't currently have a way of documenting a baseline and understanding our progress in attracting new audiences. So that's something that actually is a new initiative that we're really just starting to dig into this year. We have a new president and CEO who is very, very interested in this particular question. And so a year from now or 2 years from now, I hope to have more information on how this went to share. But you know, we also don't have a really good way of tracking the demographics of our regular program participants. Outside of the 3 programs that I've talked about that specifically have social inclusion goals, we don't have ways of collecting that data for, you know, the people who sign up for our adult certificate programs or for our summer camp programs, or, you know, all of the sort of traditional education programs that Botanic Gardens offer. We are, however, making an effort to participate in events that reach new audiences to let them know the garden is a place that welcomes them. For example, we participate in the Chicago Gay Pride Parade and the Bud Billiken Parade, which is a celebration of African American life and culture. It's the largest in the US, in Chicago. So there are a lot of ways in which a garden can support social inclusion through specific programming, staffing, and HR policies and operations. But there are also substantial challenges in documenting whether or not you're successful. You know, how do you collect that information without being intrusive? And so we're working on that. So to close, I'll share just a few lessons learned over my time here at the garden, and then I will take some more questions if there are any. So the first is to review current programs. You might already be working towards social inclusion and just not thinking of it in that context. If you are, make what you're doing explicit. Let people know what you're doing. If you're not already, think about how you can build on what you're already doing and whether there are opportunities within your existing program portfolio. So, you know, play to your strengths. Don't try to create a program that does this where you don't already have resources in place that you can bring to the table. Collaborate, and I'm kind of beating the drum on this, and I have said it many, many times, whether it's internally across departments like the Science Career Continuum, or with outside organizations like Windy City Harvest and our veterans programs, you can't do it alone. Programs are always stronger for effective collaborations. Engage your audiences. So don't assume you know what any particular audience wants and needs. Talk to the people you want to engage and see what's of interest to them. And that's something that we found many, many times is you can go into a community or create a program that you think really addresses the needs of that community. But if the community doesn't see it that way, that program won't be successful. So start small. Take the first step and grow from there. No program is built in a day. We took 20 years to build the Science Career Continuum, and we're going on 13 for Windy City Harvest. The Science Career Continuum, we started working with 3 schools in the city of Chicago and 9 high school students every other year. Windy City Harvest started with 1 youth farm in North Chicago and grew as we were able. And I've said this already, evaluate and tell your story. Make sure that you can share what you're doing, that you document and you can share what you're doing. And that, again, is really key for fundraising as well as visibility and selling these programs to your larger donor base and your board of directors and your senior leadership. And finally, look inward and look outward. Look inward at your own operations, practices, and audience and see how you can be more inclusive. There are always ways to do it, and a lot of them are small changes that you can make. And then look outward. Who is it out there that you're not engaging, and how can you? So that wraps up my presentation. I am happy to answer any questions, and it looks like we have about 10 minutes or so. What's next? Well, I think what's next for the garden there are a couple of different things. I think one I mentioned is this effort that we are launching with our new president and CEO to really begin to, and as I said, document and evaluate, to gather data. Gather data on who our audiences are, who's coming here, who isn't, what they want to see, and there's always this tension between programs that are specifically designed to address social inclusion goals and, as an institution, being inclusive in welcoming audiences. So thinking about that and how we have these sort of parallel trajectories. So I think that's one thing that's next. Really, and then the other thing is looking for more collaborations and ways to serve new audiences and different audiences. So a question here, what have been some successful fundraising strategies and events for programs like this? In terms of strategies, we actually have been very, very successful. And again, this is a US context, and so I'm not, I don't fully understand how this works in different countries. We have been very, very successful in making the social goals of our programs explicit, both with federal funding, federal and state sort of government funding, and with individual foundations. A lot of it has to do with the interests of the individual foundation or funding organizations and pairing those together. And pairing the two together. In terms of events, we don't do a lot of fundraising events specifically for these social inclusion programs. Most of our fundraising events are targeted at operating expenses. That said, Windy City Harvest, for example, hosts events at their sites, and we charge groups for say having a community meeting at one of our Windy City Harvest sites because it's a beautiful place to have a meeting. So there's in some ways we do through Windy City Harvest, we host events for other people and they compensate us for the space. So we're a partner on the Big Picnic Project, food security. This might be a great chance to improve what we do against social exclusion. Do you have any special science or food festivals that have been successful? So we don't specifically hold science and food festivals. One festival we do host every year, which most of you are probably familiar with, is we do have a big festival on World Environment Day. And that focuses on a different theme every year. And we have focused on creating local food systems at that event. But, you know, a lot of our fundraising is not sort of focused on these events and festivals. It's much more grant driven. So I'm not sure I have a great, oh, and there is one that I'm going to have to look up. Farm Aid. That's what I was thinking of. Farm Aid is a big food festival in the US focused on sustainable agriculture. And so we did connect with that. And that was a really good way of sort of getting the word out on how we can use agriculture to address social exclusion and welcome people in. And so I don't know if there are any other questions. You can see my email is on this last slide here. And I am more than happy for any of you to contact me if you have any other questions, either about how we operate our social inclusion programs or about any other programs at the Chicago Botanic Garden.
Thank you very much for that, Jennifer. And it's just so great to hear about all of the amazing projects, and I'm sure that everyone's going away with some great ideas. And so finally, I'd just like to say thank you again to Jennifer. Goodbye.
Bye.